July 7, 1944, Saipan, Mariana Islands. Morning light arrives over the American locations of the U.S. Army 27th Infantry Division. In ditches and dugouts, Marines and soldiers inspect their firearms one last time. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien of the 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry Regiment, holds 2 Colt M1911A1 pistols, each filled with 7 rounds of 45 ACP bullets. The aim is clear, to live through the biggest banzai attack of the Pacific War. At 4:45 a.m., the ground shakes. Through the early morning darkness comes a noise that will stick with those who lived forever. Thousands of Japanese soldiers yelling as they run straight into American lines. You're watching the valor unveiled, where the hardest orders forge the greatest courage. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Leading the charge are Imperial Japanese Army officers, their katana swords shining, followed by line after line of soldiers carrying Arisaka rifles with fixed bayonets. Among them, officers hold the standard handgun of the Imperial forces, the Type 14 Nambu pistol, which used an 8-take 22-minute round. What takes place next will show the clear contrast between two nations' ideas on personal combat firearms and uncover why American soldiers carried what many would call the most capable military handgun ever made, the American Colt. M1911A1 had come to the Pacific with a name already made in the trenches of World War I, created by famous firearms designer John Moses Browning and accepted by the U.S. Army in 1911, the single-action, recoil-operated pistol fired the 45 ACP round, a cartridge made for one reason: takedown force. The 45 ACP sent a 230-grain bullet at 830 feet per second from the government-issue M1911A1 pistol. The round worked at a fairly low chamber pressure of 21,000 psi, but its heavy, slow-moving bullet delivered destructive final results. The math was very straightforward. When shot from the M1911A1's 5-inch barrel, the 45 ACP round had enough force to knock a man down no matter where it hit. The 230-grain bullet, moving at 830 feet per second, would lodge itself upon hitting rather than passing through. This quality made it powerfully effective in close-range fighting, where one well-aimed shot could end a danger right away. By 1944, American factories had made 178,742 M1911A1 pistols for the war. Production had been spread out across many companies: Colt Firearms, Remington Rand, Ithaca Gun Company, Union Switch and Signal Company, and even the Singer Sewing Machine Company, which made 500 highly desired pistols before giving their tools to other makers. This huge production made sure that American soldiers in the Pacific were well supplied with dependable handguns. The U.S. Marine Corps alone had raised their approved pistol allowance from 798 per division in 1942 to 1,077 per division by 1945. This showed an understanding that Pacific combat often turned into close-range fighting where rifles and machine guns became clumsy. Every Marine officer, many NCOs, tank crews, artillery teams, and special units carried the M1911A1 as their main personal defense firearm. Standing in clear difference was the Japanese Type 14 Nambu pistol. Named for Colonel Kijiro Nambu and brought out in 1926, this pistol was Japan's try at updating their military handguns. The Type 14 was a striker-fired semi-automatic pistol with an 8-round magazine and a 4.6-inch barrel. Even with one more round than the M1911A1, the Nambu had basic design and bullet weaknesses. The Type 14 shot the 8x22mm Nambu round, a bottlenecked cartridge that sent a 100-grain bullet at about 1,000 feet per second. While this speed was higher than the 45 ACP, the much lighter bullet had far less force and takedown power. The 8x22mm Nambu was unique in its size. Its bullet width of 321 inches and bottlenecked case style meant it had no similarity with any other military round in the world. This isolation made logistics difficult and limited bullet improvements. Japanese military belief required officers to buy their own handguns, and the Type 14 had been made to be cheaper than earlier Nambu models. At 78 yen, it was still costly, a big part of an officer's monthly pay, but easier to get than the 180 yen Type B Nambu that came before it. This money situation meant that many Japanese officers in the Pacific carried pistols that were basically not good enough for battle against committed enemies, the Type 14s. Design weaknesses became clear in combat situations. The safety system needed two hands to use, one to hold the pistol, another to move the safety switch above the trigger guard. This made it not possible to quickly get the weapon ready while under fire or in tight spots. The magazine release system was troublesome. Wet or dirty conditions would make the magazine stick, making reloading hard or impossible. Unlike the M1911A1, the Type 14 had no bolt hold open feature, so users could not tell right away when the weapon was empty. Most importantly, the magazine had a disconnect feature that kept the pistol from shooting if the magazine was taken out or lost. While meant as a safety feature, this meant that a Type 14 with a broken or lost magazine became completely worthless. Unlike the M1911A1, which could still fire a chambered round even with the magazine out. By 1944, Japan had made about 400,000 Type 14 Nambu pistols since 1926. This number, while large, was small in comparison to American production. The United States had built nearly 5 times as many M1911A1 pistols in just the war years, showing the huge manufacturing ability gap between the two countries. The morning of July 7, 1944, would put these firearm systems to their final challenge. Major McCarthy of the 27th Infantry Division later said the Japanese Banzai attack looked like a cattle rush from a Western movie, except the Japanese just kept on coming. The attack had come after a night of heavy drinking by Japanese soldiers, with beer and sake drunk in large amounts as soldiers got ready for what many knew would be their last fight. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien found himself in the direct line of the attack. As Japanese officers led the charge with drawn swords, O'Brien pulled both of his M1911A1 pistols and started firing at enemies at close range. The 45 ACP rounds were powerfully effective against the charging enemy. Each 230-grain bullet that hit its target dropped an attacker right away, the heavy bullet putting all its energy into the target. When O'Brien used up the bullets in both pistols, 14 rounds in total, he was badly hurt in the shoulder but kept fighting. Relying on the M1911A1's name for dependability, he had complete trust that each trigger pull would result in a shot. The pistol's simple, strong design meant that dirt, blood, and the confusion of battle did not stop its function. After using his pistol bullets, O'Brien took control of a Jeep-mounted .50 caliber machine gun and continued his protection. His rearguard fight allowed many of his men to fall back and regroup. When the Japanese finally took his spot, at least 30 enemy bodies were found around his last fighting spot, many of them credited to his accurate pistol fire in the first moments of the attack. The story of Private Tom Baker from the same fight shows the M1911A1's part as a final option firearm. When Baker's rifle bullets were used up, he used the weapon as a club until it broke apart on Japanese attackers. Hurt and unable to keep falling back with his unit, Baker was set up against a tree by his fellow soldiers. They lit a cigarette for him and put a loaded M1911A1 in his hands with 8 rounds in the magazine, 7 in the mag plus 1 in the chamber. When Baker's body was found after the battle, the M1911A1 lay empty beside him, and 8 Japanese soldiers were dead in a rough circle around his spot. Each of the 7 magazine rounds, plus the chambered round, had found a target, showing both the weapon's accuracy and the powerful effect of the 45 ACP round in skilled hands. These stories were not rare events. All over the Pacific, the M1911A1 proved its value in countless fights. During the Guadalcanal campaign in 1942-1943, there was a dramatic moment at the division command post when a sword-carrying Japanese officer and 2 riflemen ran straight toward Admiral Archer Vandegrift. Marines with M1911A1 pistols met the attackers at close range, with the 45 ACP rounds proving able to stop committed enemies even when they were in a full charge. The power of the 45 ACP round was no mistake. The cartridge had been made specifically because of American military experience during the Philippine conflict from 1899 to 1901. U.S. soldiers armed with 38 long Colt revolvers had faced Moro tribesmen who, even when shot many times at close range, would keep fighting. The weak takedown force of the smaller round led to a military need for a minimum .45 caliber handgun round. After the Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904, which looked at the power of various rounds against both live animals and human bodies, the U.S. Army decided that nothing less than .45 caliber would provide enough takedown force. The resulting .45 ACP cartridge, when shot from the M1911A1, could knock the enemy over from any entry point on the body, unlike smaller caliber rounds that might wound without right-away disabling. The mental effect of the .45 ACP was as important as its physical effect. The large caliber sound and visible hit on targets had a deep effect on enemy spirit. Japanese soldiers armed with their underpowered Type 14 Nambu pistols quickly learned to respect the unique sound of M1911A1 fire. The deep boom of the .45 ACP was clearly different from the sharper crack of smaller calibers, and enemy forces learned to connect it with immediate deadliness. Japanese military papers found during the war showed the enemy's knowledge of American firepower advantage. A diary taken from a Japanese officer on Makan Atoll in November 1943 mentioned the overpowering nature of American weapons. The officer wrote, "We know we are going to die, so we have no fear of anybody and everyone is high-spirited." But his notes also showed a clear understanding that Japanese soldiers were beaten in terms of gear and supplies. Individual Japanese soldiers carried equipment loads of 45 kilo, which was 87% of the average soldier's 52 kilo body weight. This crushing load, along with not good enough weapons and decreasing bullet supplies, created a force that depended on fierce resolve rather than better strategy. The Type 14 Nambu, as the main officer handgun, was a sign of the wider problems facing Japanese soldiers. Weapons made in peacetime that proved not good enough for the needs of total war. The contrast in making quality became clear as the war went on. American M1911A1 production kept high standards even under wartime rush. Weapons made by different companies were swappable, with uniform parts making sure that field repairs could be done using parts from any maker. The pistols were finished with tough Parkerized coatings instead of bluing, and grips were changed from checkered walnut to brown plastic to speed up production, but mechanical dependability never got worse. Japanese Type 14 production, on the other hand, showed declining quality as the war went on. Late-war pistols made at the Toriyamatsu factory had ungrooved wooden slab grips to speed up production, and overall fit and finish got worse as Japan's industrial ability was strained by Allied bombing and resource shortages. Some late-war Type 14 pistols were dated as late as February 1945, showing production went on even as American soldiers closed in on the Japanese home islands. The difference in bullet logistics was just as telling. The United States made standard military .45 ACP rounds in huge amounts with steady performance and quality checks. Special types were also made, including the M12T23 shot shell given out in USAAF survival kits. This round held 118 pieces of number 7 1-2 birdshot in a red wax paper bullet, letting air crews with M1911A1 pistols hunt small game if shot down behind enemy lines. An improved M15 shot shell with 108 pieces of birdshot and better weather protection replaced the earlier round. Japan, meanwhile, had trouble keeping enough supplies of the unique 822 Nambu ammunition. The round's unique size meant it could not be replaced with captured bullets or simplified using common parts, as Japanese supply lines were cut by American submarine and air attacks. Type 14 pistols became harder and harder to keep in use. The quality of American pistol training also helped the M1911A1's combat victory. U.S. soldiers got thorough training in pistol shooting skills, with focus on the weapons part as both a main tool for officers and NCOs and as a backup weapon when main firearms failed. The M1911A1 single-action trigger gave a crisp, steady pull that helped accuracy, while the heavy weight of the all-steel build helped control the kick from the powerful .45 ACP round. Japanese training, by contrast, focused on traditional warrior skills, including sword fighting and bayonet fighting. While these skills could be effective in close combat, they required getting to contact distance, something that became harder and harder against American soldiers equipped with better firepower. The Type 14 Nambu was often seen more as a sign of rank than as a useful combat tool, with many officers getting little training in its use. The M1911A1's dependability in tough situations became famous among Pacific veterans. The pistol worked in the mud of Guadalcanal, the coral dust of Tarawa, the volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, and the rain-soaked ground of Okinawa. Its simple, strong design meant that basic field care could keep the weapon working even in the most difficult conditions. Stories of M1911A1 dependability were passed down through Marine and Army units. Weapons that had been under salt water, buried in sand, or dropped from planes continued to work with little care. The loose fitting that some critics pointed to as reducing accuracy actually helped the pistol's ability to work when filled with dirt, a key advantage in Pacific combat situations. The Type 14 Nambu's magazine problems became infamous among those who saw them. The mix of tight fitting and the magazine disconnect feature meant that weapons exposed to sand, mud, or salt water often became completely useless. Unlike the M1911A1, which could be quickly field stripped and cleaned with few tools, the Type 14 needed more complex care steps that were hard to do in combat situations. By late 1944, as American forces got ready for the attack on the Japanese home islands, the gap in small arms effectiveness had become clear. American units carried M1911A1 pistols that had been improved through 3 years of Pacific combat experience. Changes based on battlefield reports had improved dependability and handling, while making quality stayed consistently high despite huge production numbers. Japanese soldiers, meanwhile, faced serious lack of bullets, spare parts, and even basic weapons. Many late-war units were supplied with a mix of captured weapons, outdated systems, and quickly made gear of declining quality. The Type 14 Nambu, despite its 18-year service life, had never changed to meet the needs of modern war. The invasion of Okinawa in April 1945 gave the final, bloodiest test of these firearm systems. During 82 days of harsh fighting, American soldiers faced the most fierce opposition of the Pacific War. Japanese defenders, knowing that Okinawa was the last major block before the home islands, fought with desperate resolve. American soldiers lost more than 12,000 killed and 36,000 wounded taking Okinawa. But Japanese losses were disastrous. $70,000. Military dead plus between 100,000 and 150,000 civilian deaths. The gap in effectiveness between American and Japanese small arms played a key part in this result. U.S. Marines and soldiers with M1911A1 pistols could meet and stop dangers at close range with trust in their weapons' power. The M1911A1's mental effect on Japanese soldiers cannot be downplayed. Captured papers and after-war interviews showed that Japanese soldiers had grown a deep respect for American firepower, especially the powerful effect of .45 caliber weapons. The unique sound of M1911A1 fire became linked with immediate deadliness, affecting enemy spirit and battle decisions. As American soldiers readied for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan set for November 1945, planners saw that city combat on the home islands would need wide use of handguns. The M1911A1's proven power in close-range fighting made it a vital tool for the expected street-to-street fights in Japanese cities. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the war before Operation Downfall could happen. But the M1911A1's name had been forever set. The pistol that had served American soldiers from the trenches of France to the beaches of the Pacific had proven its value in the most difficult combat situations. After the war, studies showed the full size of the gap between American and Japanese small arms production. The United States had made nearly 2 million M1911A1 pistols during the war years, while Japan's total Type 14 production over almost 2 decades barely went over 400,000 units. This 5-to-1 production edge showed wider industrial abilities that in the end decided the war's result. The power of the .45 ACP round in Pacific combat led to its continued use by American Special Operations Forces long after the M1911A1 was replaced as the standard military handgun. The round's proven takedown force made it essential for close-range combat situations where stopping a danger right away was vital. Japanese weapons, including the Type 14 Nambu, became highly desired war trophies among American servicemen. The pistol's unique look and connection with enemy officers made it a valued keepsake despite its worse combat performance. Many American veterans brought Type 14 pistols home as reminders of their Pacific service, often not knowing that they had carried far better weapons throughout the war. The contrast between the M1911A1 and Type 14 Nambu showed more than just different ideas on handgun design. It showed basic differences in industrial ability, battle doctrine, and understanding of modern war. The American pistol was the result of a planned method to weapon making, using lessons learned from past conflicts and supported by huge industrial production abilities. The Type 14 Nambu, while a big step up from earlier Japanese handguns, had the weaknesses of a nation that had entered the industrial age fairly recently and did not have the resources for wide weapon development and testing. The pistol's problems were a sign of wider Japanese military challenges: not good enough logistics, declining production quality, and a belief system that focused on fighting spirit over better technology. For American soldiers in the Pacific, the M1911A1 gave not just a dependable weapon, but also trust in their gear's advantage. The knowledge that their handguns could stop any danger with one well-aimed shot affected battle decisions and personal spirit. In the life-or-death situations that defined Pacific combat, this trust could mean the difference between living and dying. The lasting impact of the M1911A1 in Pacific combat goes far beyond its mechanical details or production numbers. The pistol became a symbol of American industrial power and professional skill. Its effectiveness against Japanese soldiers with worse weapons showed the importance of technology advantage in modern war. The stories of men like Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien and Private Tom Baker, who used their M1911A1 pistols to deadly effect in their last moments, became part of American military legend. These stories, confirmed by battle summaries and witness accounts, showed that the right weapons in skilled hands could get results far beyond what simple numbers might suggest. The .45 ACP round shot from M1911A1 pistols had stopped banzai charges, taken out infiltrators, and given American soldiers a dependable last line of protection when everything else failed. In the harsh, close-range combat that defined much of the Pacific War, the takedown force and dependability of the American pistol proved to be a game-changer. Japanese soldiers, despite their bravery and resolve, found themselves constantly beaten not just in overall firepower, but in the basic effectiveness of their personal weapons. The Type 14 Nambu, using an underpowered round and having design weaknesses that became critical in combat, could not match American weapons that had been made specifically for maximum combat effectiveness. The mathematical truth was unavoidable. A 230-grain bullet moving at 830 feet per second had far more force and takedown power than a 100-grain bullet at 1,000 feet per second. When this was repeated across millions of combat meetings throughout the Pacific, this bullet advantage turned into a battle advantage that helped decide the war's result. The M1911A1's victory in Pacific combat proved John Moses Browning's original design and the U.S. military's choice to accept the .45 ACP round. The weapon system showed that careful design, enough testing, and huge production could create small arms that gave key advantages on the battlefield. For Japan, the Type 14. Nambu's weaknesses showed a wider challenge: the difficulty of competing against an industrial and technological giant while not having the resources for full military updating. The pistol's problems were a small example of Japan's overall strategic situation, forced to depend on fighting spirit and new tactics to make up for material shortcomings. The Pacific War showed that in modern war, the quality and amount of gear could overcome even the most committed opposition. American soldiers with better weapons like the M1911A1 and supported by huge industrial production slowly wore down Japanese resistance. Through sheer material advantage, the power of the .45 ACP round in Pacific combat shaped American military thinking for decades. Even after the M1911A1 was replaced by the Beretta M9 in 1985, Special Operations units kept using .45 caliber pistols for situations needing maximum takedown force. The lessons learned in Pacific combat about the importance of right-of-way, stopping dangers continued to shape American small arms development. The contrast between American and Japanese handguns in the Pacific in the end tells a larger story about industrial war in the 20th century. Nations that could design, make, and give out better gear in huge amounts had key advantages over those that could not. The M1911A1 versus Type 14 Nambu comparison shows this rule at the most personal level, in the hands of individual soldiers fighting for their lives. The success of the M1911A1 in Pacific combat cemented its place in American military history and popular culture. The pistol became a symbol of American fighting power, dependability under stress, and the victory of better engineering over worse options. Its performance against Japanese soldiers with Type 14 Nambu pistols showed without a doubt that in matters of life and death, gear quality could decide results. The mathematical exactness of the .45 ACP's performance. 230 grains at 830 feet per second turned into battlefield effectiveness that Japanese soldiers could not match with their 100-grain bullets at 1,000 feet per second. This difference, repeated across thousands of combat meetings, helped secure American victory in the Pacific and establish the M1911A1 as one of the most successful military handguns in history.